Our guest today is Kwasi Mitchell. Welcome to our Impact series, Kwasi. First, I'd like to start by telling our audience a little bit about you. So, Kwasi Mitchell serves as the Chief Purpose Officer of Deloitte and currently advises clients within the government and commercial sectors. As the first individual to hold this position, he's responsible for driving a firm wide strategy around Deloitte's commitment to include diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, and climate change, and education and workforce development. Kwasi formerly served as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader and the pro bono and social impact lead for Deloitte Consulting. He has a PhD in inorganic chemistry and sits on the board of several global nonprofits. So we're so excited to have you here today, Kwasi. Thank you. We only have about 25 minutes together, so I'm going to get to my long list of questions right away.
I appreciate you having me, Angel, and I promise not to be long-winded in my answers so we can get through all of them.
Okay. Please take your time, though. So, to begin, you're certainly leading the way as the first Chief Purpose Officer at Deloitte. And I know your previous positions have sort of prepared you for this journey, but what would you say is the biggest challenge you're currently facing in your current role?
It's a combination of things, right? First and foremost, having people understand what a chief purpose officer does, right? Because it is a relatively new position that started to surface around a number of different organizations. In fact, I think the last time we did a poll of maybe the Fortune 500, there's several handful, like maybe no more than like 30 to 40 chief purpose officers. So first and foremost, it's that. The
Wow.
second major challenge is really more along the lines of being very clear on the impact that we as an organization is trying to drive, right? It's been very key, especially since we as members of the Business Roundtable in 2019, the Business Roundtable changed the definition of a purpose of an organization. So really, what does that mean to us that we as an organization are driving purpose and impact, that our people feel like that they are contributing to that purpose and impact on a daily basis, and that we're showing up within society and impacting all of our stakeholders at scale, which is something that we should do as the world's largest professional services firm. And then the third thing, one key component of my role is really helping us determine when we want to use our voice as an organization on key political or social issues, and really being thoughtful on the things that we as a firm can influence. We as a firm should speak to things that are core to our core values, and ultimately that we are being measured and thoughtful in our response, since the so many different aspects of the world as we know it is changing on a daily basis.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like they've certainly got the right person for the job. You've had a really, really impressive career and tenure at Deloitte for nearly 15 years, and you've had the opportunity to lead in so many ways. Would you discuss your leadership style a little bit, especially given your background as a chemistry PhD? How would you say your approach differs from your colleagues, and could you provide an example of that?
So what you'll find with many consultants is that they are very focused on formulating a hypothesis to drive change. I think my scientific training has really brought me to the forefront of thinking about things in terms of like what's a hypothesis, what's the change that we're trying to solve or drive, and ultimately kind of what are the systems in play here that we need to think through. More so than anything else, I think my scientific training has really allowed for me to be very, very neutral and unbiased in my approach. Like I generally don't formulate a ton of opinions without listening to some aspects of like the data that's in front of us, like the information that we need to know to formulate like a particular perspective, which is key, Angel, as you would expect in the role I'm in now, where we're dealing with issues that are so personal to so many people when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, or sustainability and climate change, or aspects associated with like education and workforce development and developing future generations of leaders. I would say my leadership style, and as an example, I'm an introvert by nature. So I think one key aspect of my leadership style is trying to pull in as many people as possible and get different perspectives around the table. I don't necessarily like being the person who makes all the decisions because I think that there's so many interesting perspectives out there. So a key aspect of my leadership style is going back to my teams, making sure that people who are also introverts are heard, making sure that we've had a thoughtful discussion, and then making the decision and moving on. So that's just something that's core to who I am.
Well, that's awesome. I love the idea of taking a scientific approach to problems. I try to do that when I'm working on a case or anything like that. So that's really great. Thank you for that. Is there any particular examples you want to share around your leadership style?
It's funny, I think, from the standpoint of examples with respect to my leadership style. I think that there's a fair amount of aspects that surface with respect to having people. And it was funny. I was having a team session the other day where my team is so used to me going around the table and asking people their specific opinions that I didn't do that like I ended up getting feedback associated with I did something atypical, so is there something that's wrong? So I think more so than anything else, like setting yourself up as a leader who listens to others, so much so that when you don't create time and space for it, your team fills in the gap because they know that that's something that they appreciate is really key and something that I'm very excited about.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, going into sort of examples of things to achieve all that you have in your career, I'm sure you have some stories to tell as to like what pushed you forward to do that. So, what have been, I guess, some of the most influential professional experiences throughout your career?
Yeah, and I think, well, my career is still a work in progress, right? So I'm not great at looking back at something that's still in full flight. I think more so than anything else, one of the a few items that I'm probably the most proud of with respect to some of the things that I've driven has, first and foremost was getting my PhD. I'm first member of my family to have done that. I definitely don't think the last, right? But being able to set an example for others as to what we can accomplish from an academic standpoint, particularly from a higher education perspective, and knowing that I've had brothers and sisters who have gone to college, but not necessarily to that degree. The other thing that's been really important to me over the course of my career are just, in so many respects, I think it's fundamentally important that you operate in roles and spaces that you're making your organization better for others. So I've had probably two to three different DE&I related positions before. I've had two to three different positions that have been focused on recruiting and retaining talent. I have my current role, which is focused on not only aspects of that nature, but how do we transform the firm for a broader force for good on things such as climate change and sustainability. So being able to be a change agent and continually in areas of that nature is a highlight of my career that I just hope continues to be the case for many, many years in the future.
That's awesome. So, as you just talked about, like your other positions outside of Deloitte, where you're changing things, you've had some really great opportunity to use your experiences and expertise outside of that work as a board member for these several nonprofit organizations. Would you discuss the experience of entering and leading that space?
Of course, and probably the nonprofit that I spent the longest period of time on their board is called Urban Alliance. It's a phenomenal organization, headquartered in DC, but in several markets across the US. The key aspects of this particular nonprofit that really struck me more so than anything else is their focus on a combination of mentorship and also job skills, right? So the youth that they serve typically have a year-long internship, and then in addition to that, there's a fair amount of mentorship growth and programming that equip them for being successful in the workforce. And one of the many things that I loved about the organization is that they deliberately went out and focused on youth that were not necessarily always considered quote unquote the best and the brightest according to grades or score, like test scores or things of that nature. They really wanted to find the people who fundamentally needed the support so that they could continue to grow, matriculate to college, or conversely have a career longer term that they could support a family off of. And my involvement with the organization probably spanned close to 9 to 10 years. I initially started with helping them in a pro bono project that we had sponsored at Deloitte that was focused on how do they think about scaling to other markets. At that point in time, they were in DC and Baltimore. They've now expanded to several other markets, just thinking through what criteria should they be focused on from the standpoint of being successful in those areas. We then went on to do a slew of other items, and ultimately I was invited to be on their board. But I think more so than anything else, just being able to work with nonprofits specifically on items that are kind of the key challenges that they have in front of them from serving and delivering on their mission is the mentality that I've always taken into relationships. And so, so many of, the people who have joined or will listen to this call, you'll have ample opportunities to work with nonprofits. I would just say, just make sure that the opportunities that you have end up being those things that are just critical to helping that nonprofit deliver on the most important aspects of their mission.
Would you say that just, kind of thinking about that and how your PhD sort of guided you in a lot of the work that you're doing, would you say that having that background in inorganic chemistry has influenced your participation on some of these nonprofit organizations? Do you take some of that into some of the work that you're doing outside of Deloitte?
I think it's less my PhD and more my lived experience, right? Angel, I have a large family of four brothers and four sisters. My mom raised the nine of us, and I would say more so than anything else, like the thing that I focused on is just understanding that I was able to achieve things because of hard work and a fair amount of luck, and things could have gone drastically different with a few wrong decisions here and there. So my focus on working with different organizations is really about how do we create pathways for others, right? Like how do I create pathways for other chief purpose officers at organizations as phenomenal as Deloitte, as other partners within professional services, or people just fundamentally being able to have a pathway to a family sustaining career, which is just so key, particularly for historically marginalized communities. So all of that being said and done, it's less my chemistry background and more just my lived experience that has me engage in certain organizations and think about the way that we should be serving the youth or the populations that they're trying to interact with.
Sure, yeah, I can totally relate to you on that. I'm the youngest of four, and I'm the first to get a bachelor's degree. So seeing those pathways that can be created and how we can influence them outside of the work that we're doing within our organizations is really, really powerful. So thank you for that. Um, your accomplishments are a mile long, but ooh, excuse me, what would you consider your greatest accomplishment to be, and how did you achieve it? I know that may be a tough question. Uh, feel free to mention a few instead of just one.
No,
Um, but what's your secret sauce?
no secret sauce. My greatest accomplishment is probably convincing my wife to marry me, but I won't bore you guys with that. I would say more so than anything else, and this ties back to our my last response on creating pathways for people. Uh, my greatest accomplishment has been I promised my mom, I believe when I was in high school, that someday, I would have a job where I would be able to afford to pay her rent, right? And have provide a lifestyle for her that I think that she deserves. So my greatest accomplishment was when I delivered on that, like shortly after getting my PhD. And more so than anything else, I think of this as to our last, comment, creating pathways for people for careers. Like, I mean, I didn't grow up with family members who were chemists, right? I had a mentor when I was in the fourth grade who was a chemist that kind of showed me that like there's different things that I could aspire towards and career pathways that were open for me. And but for an intervention like that, like I could have made drastically different decisions that may not have been able to lead to me being able to fulfill that promise that I made to my mother. And so more so than anything else, I would say it's that particular aspect that has been so incredibly has made me proud. But simultaneously, when you think about aspects of wealth accumulation and the gaps between, let's say, Black and Brown communities from a wealth accumulation standpoint, many of it is because there are things that are impediments, like a child paying for his or her parents, like family members, different expenses and things of that nature that others just don't have. And so I would say, as everyone here on this call goes off and does really, really great things, think about those different, systemic challenges that we have as a society that prevent some from accumulating wealth and taking care and truly being able to do all the great things that they could do in their lives, and others that don't have those same advantages or disadvantages, and think about ways that we individually can level that playing field for all.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Like I said, I have some similar experiences, and being able to be where you are and come from that background, it's really rewarding. So wonderful, greatest accomplishment. I hope that I can I hope that I can be there one day as well. Can you talk just a little bit about going from your PhD in organic chemistry to becoming chief purpose officer? I guess really more about that transition into being a scientist and going into consulting.
Yeah, of course. I think that the key aspect to a long and fulfilling career is that you're constantly learning. So after completing my PhD, I did spend some time in the energy industry, before making the pivot over to consulting. And what I enjoyed about my time in the energy industry is that my job effectively changed like every, 18 months or so. And and then that was what consulting provided for me as well, was the opportunity for my job to change every 18 months or so. So my 15 years with the firm, I, generally joke with people that I've had 20 different jobs and have always been able to maintain a really high learning curve more so than anything else. And because of that, like, it's led to me exploring and raising my hands at different points in time. Like, I initially got involved in different things like recruiting on campus because I saw a challenge that happened with respect to one intern that we had, early in my career within the firm, and talked to a leader about it. And he was like, okay, well, go figure out what happened and then fix it. Right. And that led to roles within talent, which led to roles within DE&I, which led to where I am currently. And simultaneously, I've always approached like the clients I serve in that same way, like thinking about what are the things that are the next evolution of what they might need, and becoming proficient and thoughtful and building an understanding of those distinct items. So keep your learning curve high. Be curious. I think that those are the two things that are important more so than anything else.
That is wonderful advice. I'll take that with me right away. So, between your current role as Chief Purpose Officer and your previous work as Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader and the Pro Bono and Social Impact Lead for Deloitte, how have you fostered discourse and engagement at Deloitte? I guess what's worked well, and if you're willing to share, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered to do so?
Yeah. I think what's worked well, you always have to set a vision for people, right? Like, people need to know where you're going, right, before you can mobilize action. Otherwise, the action that you have is pretty diffuse and not as impactful as it fundamentally can be. So generally, when I enter into new roles, that particularly things that are somewhat ambiguous or created that are being created that are net new or need that reset, set that vision for where are we going to be next year or 18 months or 24 months from now. Have people mobilize around that vision and have them laser focus on how you achieve that. I think particularly in the world of DE&I, there's so much passion and energy that, like, without focus, we can find that a lot of activities occur, but may not be driving the distinct outcomes that we would really fundamentally want to have happen. And so, like, I'm just very, very key on set the vision, determine the focus, do the actions that like make the most sense to drive the outcomes that are needed. And you have to do that in any major role of the items that I've assumed in my career over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years.
So you talked a little bit about mobilizing people around that vision. Can you talk a bit about how you do that? I mean, I know that's
Yeah.
kind of the big the big question, right? We all want to mobilize people around something, but what are some of the things that you've done to successfully mobilize people around your visions?
Yeah, a few things. Like anytime you deal with something of this nature that is so inherently personal to people, you got some volunteers right out of the gate, right? Like figure out ways to get those volunteers moving in a direction and bring them into the fold early so that they're part of the solution right away. You then end up with a fair number of people who sit on the sideline. And frequently, the people who sit on the sideline is more driven by the fact that they just don't know what to do rather than they don't care. And so I'm very big into being very prescriptive on like, if you have 15 minutes a week to work on this, these are the actions you should move forward with. If you have an hour a week, these are the examples of some of the actions and behaviors that you should move forward with. If you got 5 hours a week, here's some bigger roles and responsibilities. As much as you can make things tactical and tangible for people so that they know how to engage and you take away that apprehension or that fear that they might do the wrong thing or they don't know what to do, I think is incredibly key for getting more and more people up the sideline. And then the last thing that I think is really important, you need to point out to people what good looks like. Like, here's behaviors that we think are phenomenal, and I'm going to tell everybody that Angel does this routinely, like she's the beacon of what we should all aspire to do. And when people see that type of recognition and understanding that you are in fact watching and we're going to highlight what good examples are, you find more people try to emulate that as well. So those are some of the things.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm certainly jotting those notes down in terms of the prescriptive tactics and just showing people those are some really great leadership tactics. So thank you so much for that. Um, is there anything we haven't covered that you want to discuss today? Um,
I think more so than anything else, the series that you have and the people that you're inviting, I think is really incredible. Um, for me, your career isn't shaped by the roles or jobs that you have, but the impact that you provide more broadly, either in your organization or conversely in the communities in which we live on a daily basis and provide so much support to us. And so I just love that this series exists. I want to commend everybody for participating more broadly. And I'm hopeful that all of the people who join are able to get enough of some of the things that I spoke about, that they have impact within their careers that are substantially more powerful and far outseed anything that I've ever done. So just thank you more so than anything else, because I think that this is a phenomenal gathering.